Welcome back to the shop. I'm Kirk Anderson. In this video, I'm going to discuss pocket hole joinery. Now, for any of you that don't know what pocket holes are a way of joining pieces of wood with screws that go in on an angle. Now, to drill these holes for the pocket hole screws, you need a special jig to do this. There is no way you'd be able to drill these holes holding the drill free-handed. A pocket hole joint is a relatively strong joint by itself, but when you add glue to it, it even becomes stronger. Now, there are quite a few manufacturers of pocket hole jigs out there. Probably the most well-known is Kreg, and I use one of their jigs. I use their K4 jig. Now, you can actually make your own pocket hole jig if you really wanted to. Now, the K4 jig is a pretty robust little jig. It has a sleeve that goes into the jig that's adjustable. Now, I've had this jig for a while, and it has a set screw in order to adjust the sleeve. I lost the screw that came with it, so I'm just using a regular screw. Now, as you can see, it has marks on the side of the sleeve. That's so you can set the thickness of the material that you're going to be using. Now, in order to drill pocket holes, you need a special bit for this, regardless of what type of jig you're using. Now, the two most popular Kreg jigs, the K5 and the K4, has a built-in scale that's so you can set the sleeve to the thickness of the material that you're going to be cutting. Now, when you're setting the thickness on the drill bit, you want to set it on the shoulder of the drill bit, not the very tip. Now, I mounted my jig to a board to make it easier to use, and I also put some extension wings on it. The jig is really simple to use. You put the material in that you want to drill the holes in, and you clamp it down. And then using the special drill bit, you drill the holes. But Kreg also has individual jigs that can be very useful at times. They only cost about $15, $20. And to use these, you just put them on the board and you just clamp it to the board, and then you're able to drill the pocket hole. Now, one thing that's very important with pocket holes is you must use special screws. You can't use ordinary wood screws. But the head of a regular wood screw is beveled, which is not conducive to pocket holes. First of all, a pocket hole screw is a self-tapping screw. But the biggest thing about pocket hole screws is that it has a flat shoulder. Also, most pocket hole screws have a square head, so you need a square driver to drive them in. And basically, all jigs come with a driver in order to drive the screws in. Now, another thing you can get are some plugs to plug the holes that are drilled. Now, the way that a pocket hole is drilled, it creates an oblong hole that is basically impossible to fill without it being noticeable, unless, of course, you're going to paint the piece. As I mentioned earlier, it's really easy to use these jigs. You just place the board in, you clamp it down, and then you drill the holes. Now, for most applications, it's always recommended that you use 2 pocket hole screws in each joint. Now, in attaching the pieces, you want to clamp the pieces together. And there's special clamps that are made to go into the pockets themselves. Now, I don't like this type of clamp because, as you can see, especially with a soft wood like pine, it can actually split the wood. But in order to get a really nice tight joint, you need to clamp it. I actually prefer just using a regular bar clamp. Just clamp the pieces together and then drive the screw in. As I already mentioned, the joint will be much stronger if you add some glue to it. And there's very seldom where I don't add the glue. Now, another thing that will happen if you don't clamp it, the pieces will move. They will shift. It's just physics. The piece that has the pocket holes in it will move away from the side where the pocket holes are if you don't clamp it. Now, clamping the pieces will be pretty level to each other. When you use pocket holes, you either want to be able to hide the pocket holes, or if you just don't care if they're seen. Now, the majority of my projects that I build for the shop, I use pocket holes. In building my simple shop cart, I put the legs together with pocket holes. And when I built my assembly outfeed table, I used about 200 pocket hole screws building that. But then there's certain projects that you don't want to use pocket hole screws. Such as when I built the TV stand, I used a mortar and tenon joint. I most definitely didn't want any pocket hole screws in that build. Well, that's basically what pocket holes are in a nutshell. For certain builds, they are fantastic. And as I said, you add glue to the joint and the joint will be very strong. But pocket holes can't do everything. And it really depends on the project you're working on to whether or not it would be a good idea to use pocket holes. Well, I hope you got something out of this video, and if you did, give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And as always, all you woodworkers out there, just get out there and cut some wood.